The night my son-in-law became chief executive officer, he raised a glass to everyone who had helped him succeed. He thanked the board, his parents, his old business school professor, and even the golf partner who had introduced him to one of our largest customers. Then Derek Collins looked across the table at my faded brown jacket and smiled. "Laura won't have to worry about supporting you anymore," he said. "I found a senior apartment complex you should be able to afford. Nice place. Shuttle service, game room, nurses on call. At your age, Samuel, it is better to make the move before somebody has to make it for you." His father laughed first. Frank Collins had the kind of laugh that began before a joke was finished, especially when his son was the one telling it. Derek's mother covered her mouth, but her eyes were laughing too. My daughter Laura stared at her plate. My 15-year-old granddaughter, Emma, looked from her father to me as if she were waiting for an adult to explain why cruelty had suddenly become dinner conversation. I folded my napkin and placed it beside my coffee. "That is thoughtful of you," I said. Derek leaned back, pleased with himself. He mistook restraint for surrender. Men like him often do. What he did not know was that the company that had made him CEO that morning still belonged to me. I was 74 and had spent most of my life around steel presses and people who could judge an engine by listening to it. My late wife, Margaret, bought the brown jacket for our 35th anniversary. 43 years earlier, my friend Elias Morrow and I had opened Bennett Morrow Manufacturing in an abandoned feed warehouse outside Cedar Falls, Ohio. Margaret handled payroll at our kitchen table, while Laura slept in a laundry basket beside her chair. The company eventually employed 1,800 people. After Elias and Margaret died, I transferred our shares into the Margaret Bennett Stewardship Trust and left daily management. The trust owned 64% of the company, and I retained voting control. Publicly, it appeared to be an ordinary private investment trust. I introduced myself to Derek as a retired industrial engineer. It was true, just incomplete. He later joined Bennett Morrow through a legitimate recruitment process. I neither promoted nor blocked him. When the board selected him as CEO, I approved his chance to lead because reservations are not evidence. I did not expect Derek to begin revealing it before dessert. Derek's father lifted his glass. "To the first Collins who finally gets paid what he is worth. And to the last year Laura has to work night shifts," Derek added. Laura looked up. "I never said I was leaving the hospital." "You do not need to keep playing nurse now," he replied. "We have discussed this. I am a nurse. It is not something I play." The room became quiet. Derek smiled without looking at her. "This is not the evening for an argument." Laura lowered her eyes again. That troubled me more than his words. My daughter had once stood in a flooded emergency room for 14 hours while maintenance crews restored power. She had faced frightened families, angry surgeons, and men twice her size without losing her voice. Yet beside her husband, she seemed to measure every sentence before allowing it to leave her mouth. I drove home alone to the same white farmhouse Margaret and I had bought when Laura was 9. People assumed I kept it because I could not afford anything newer. The truth was simpler. Some homes appreciate in value. Others become part of your bones. At 8 the next morning, a courier delivered a glossy folder from Golden Meadows Senior Living. Derek had marked 3 pages with yellow tabs. On the front he had written, "Samuel, best to plan while you are still clear-headed." Inside the folder was a note asking me to sign a preliminary application. He had also included the name of a real estate agent who could list my farmhouse. I put the folder in my desk drawer. Then I called Elaine. I looked through the kitchen window at Margaret's empty rose beds. "Elaine, begin a 30-day review of every commitment made by the new executive office. Do it through ordinary controls. I do not want him warned, and I do not want him trapped." "You think he is going to make a mistake?" "Everybody makes mistakes. I want to know what he believes he is entitled to do when he thinks nobody is watching." There was a pause. "And if he does nothing wrong?" she asked. "Then he remains CEO, and I will be grateful that my instincts were unfair." That was the standard Margaret had taught me. Suspicion could tell you where to look. It could not tell you what was true. 3 days later, Derek announced something he called the Horizon Efficiency Plan. The title sounded hopeful. The first draft was not. Horizon proposed closing our original Cedar Falls plant, eliminating 317 jobs, moving precision casting to a supplier in Mexico, and selling the land to a distribution developer. It also ended the healthcare bridge we provided to the spouses of employees who died before retirement. The program was not large. It cost the company less each year than Derek's proposed executive bonus. Margaret had created it after a machinist named Tom Alvarez died of pancreatic cancer, leaving his wife uninsured 6 months before she qualified for Medicare. Derek's projections showed a dramatic increase in profit within 18 months. That was enough to excite 2 directors. It was not enough to satisfy Elaine. She sent the proposal to me through the trust's secure office. I read it twice. The numbers were polished, but they were built on assumptions no plant manager would accept. The foreign supplier had never produced components to our pressure tolerance standard. The closure estimate ignored customer recertification. Most troubling of all, the land buyer was represented by Ridgeway Industrial Partners, a new firm with almost no public history. I asked Elaine to let the normal review proceed. 1 week later, Laura came to my house and told me Derek wanted her to guarantee a $750,000 investment with the lake cottage Margaret had left her. "Do you want to?" I asked. "I do not know enough about it." That is not the same as yes. When Laura asked to see the documents, Derek accused her of embarrassing him and said the bank needed her signature by Friday. She was afraid that consulting an attorney would prove she did not trust her husband. "Do you?" I asked. She did not answer. I wanted to tell her to pack a suitcase. But a father can make a cage out of protection if he is not careful. Laura had to make her own decision, or she would simply exchange one controlling man for another. I offered to arrange an independent review of the papers with no pressure to sign or refuse. She asked me to attend, and I agreed. Before leaving, she looked at a photograph of Margaret on the factory floor. "Mom always knew when someone was lying," Laura said. "She knew when someone was avoiding a plain answer," I replied. On Monday, Karen Holloway, the Cedar Falls plant director, sent a formal objection to Horizon. Karen had been with Bennett Morrow for 28 years. She began as a quality inspector on the second shift and understood our machinery better than most consultants understood their own laptops. Her memo explained that Derek's plan underestimated shutdown costs by at least $11 million. It also warned that transferring production so quickly could interrupt a naval pump contract and expose the company to serious penalties. Derek answered by removing Karen from the restructuring committee. By Wednesday, he had placed her on administrative leave for what he called resistance to strategic alignment. He replaced her with a consultant from Collins Advisory Group, Frank Collins's company. That was the first fact that changed my concern into action. The consulting agreement had passed through a subsidiary named Northline Performance. On paper, Northline was independent. In reality, its mailing address matched a suite leased by Frank's firm, and its registered agent was Derek's college roommate. The contract was worth $2.8 million. No board disclosure mentioned the relationship. I met Elaine at a diner 20 miles outside Cedar Falls. We used to hold early company meetings there when we could not afford conference rooms. The booths had been replaced, but the coffee remained strong enough to remove paint. Elaine slid a folder across the table. "Finance flagged 3 things," she said. "The related party contract, a request to reclassify maintenance reserves as one-time restructuring costs, and private travel billed as customer development." "How much travel?" $46,000 in 11 days. "Customers?" "None on the itineraries." I closed the folder. "Has he signed the vendor agreement?" "Yesterday." "Do not cancel it yet. Freeze payment and preserve every record." Elaine studied me. "Samuel, the board can suspend him now. For the contract, perhaps. But if he has pressured employees to alter financial reports, I want their statements before he knows we are looking." Once a powerful man senses danger, everyone below him suddenly remembers events differently. You are giving him room. No, we are giving the truth room. That evening, Derek and Laura brought Emma to my house for dinner. Emma told me about a history project on local industry, but Derek dismissed me as an engineer who would know little about leadership. Then he began explaining that old factories were sentimental burdens. "A factory is not a museum," he said. "No," I replied, "but it is not a slot machine either." After dinner, he found the Golden Meadows folder in my study and suggested I transfer the farmhouse to Laura before my memory declined. He said he could manage the sale and protect the proceeds. "Did Laura ask you to speak to me?" He avoided the question. I asked him to put his proposal in writing and identify who would control the money. He left believing I was ready to cooperate. When I called Laura, she confirmed that she had never asked him to sell my home. Her voice sounded smaller than it had at my kitchen table. "Are you safe tonight?" I asked. He has never hit me. That was not the question, and we both knew it. "Are you safe?" I asked again. She took a long breath. "Yes, but I do not feel like anything belongs to me anymore." I closed my eyes. "The attorney can see you tomorrow morning," I said. "You decide whether to go." "I will go." The next week taught me how carefully Derek had built control around my daughter. His salary went into an account only he managed. Laura's nursing income went there too. He reviewed her credit card purchases, discouraged her from taking extra shifts, and had borrowed against their primary home without explaining the full amount. None of it looked dramatic by itself. Control rarely does. It arrives disguised as convenience, one password and one signature at a time. The attorney, Rebecca Shaw, explained that Laura was not obligated to secure Derek's investment with her inherited cottage. She also found that the loan package included a broad power of attorney buried among the closing papers. Laura left the meeting pale but steady. "He told me it was only a mortgage application," she said. "What do you want to do?" "I want copies of everything. Then I want my paycheck deposited into an account in my name." "Good. And I want you not to confront him yet." That was harder. "All right," I said. "You mean it?" "I mean it." She touched my arm. "Thank you for asking what I wanted." The following morning, Elaine called before sunrise. "We have the emails," she said. Derek had ordered Miguel Ortiz, our chief financial officer, to move $12 million in ordinary maintenance expenses into the Horizon Restructuring Reserve. The change would make current operations look more profitable and increase the performance bonus Derek expected at year-end. When Miguel refused, Derek threatened to replace him with someone more commercially minded. Miguel had preserved the correspondence. So had his deputy. There was more. Karen Holloway's suspension had occurred hours after she reported that Northline's savings estimate used false production figures. A junior procurement analyst had been told to remove Frank Collins's name from a vendor background summary. The company plane had carried Derek, his parents, and two friends to a resort in Arizona under a trip code belonging to a customer who had never attended. The pattern was no longer ambiguous. "Call a special board session for Friday," I told Elaine. "Keep the quarterly strategy presentation on the agenda. Invite independent counsel and the outside auditor. Will you attend?" I looked at the brown jacket hanging by the back door. "Yes," I said, "but do not put my name on the schedule." On Thursday night, Derek discovered that Laura had refused the cottage loan. I knew because Emma called me at 10:17. "Grandpa," she whispered, "Mom says everything is okay, but Dad is shouting." "Where are you?" "In my room." "Lock the door. I am coming." The drive usually took 25 minutes. I made it in 19 without doing anything Margaret would have called intelligent. When I arrived, Laura was standing in the front yard with Emma and two suitcases. Derek stood in the doorway. "This is a marital disagreement," he said. "Go home, Samuel." Laura's hands were shaking, but her voice was clear. "Emma and I are staying with Dad tonight. You walk out now. Do not expect to come back." "I heard you." Derek looked at me. "You filled her head with this. Your loan documents did most of the work." For a moment I thought he might step toward me. Instead, he laughed. "You have no idea what you are interfering with. By tomorrow afternoon, I will control a company worth more than everything you have seen in your life." I opened the car door for Emma. "Then tomorrow should be educational for both of us," I said. Laura and Emma slept in the two upstairs bedrooms. I did not sleep much at all. Around midnight, I heard movement in the kitchen. Laura was sitting at the table in one of Margaret's old robes, holding a mug she had forgotten to fill. "I keep thinking I should go back," she said. "Why?" "Because leaving feels so large." "It is large. What if I am overreacting?" I sat across from her. "You are allowed to take one night away from a man who deceived you without deciding the rest of your life before breakfast." She looked toward the staircase. "Emma should not have heard us." No, she should not have. I kept telling myself we were under pressure. His promotion, my shifts, money. I thought if I chose better words, he would become the man he was before. Was he different before? Laura considered that. He apologized before. It was one of the saddest answers I had ever heard. I reached across the table. Your mother stayed beside me for 46 years, but she never once made herself smaller to keep me comfortable. If I had asked her to, she would have corrected me with a frying pan. Laura laughed, then covered her face and cried. I stayed where I was. At 74, I had learned there are tears a father cannot stop and should not try to. Sometimes the kindest thing is to make sure his daughter does not have to hide them. At 7 the next morning, Rebecca helped Laura file for temporary financial protections and arranged for a controlled retrieval of personal belongings. Laura was not ready to file for divorce. I did not ask her to be. At 9, I showered, shaved, and took the brown jacket from its hanger. Emma met me in the hall. Are you going to work? She asked. Something like that. Mom says Dad has a big company meeting. He does. She studied my jacket. He hates that coat. Your grandmother loved it. Then wear it. I promised I would. Bennett Morrow's headquarters stood beside the Cedar Falls plant. The reception wall still displayed the first imperfect pump housing Elias and I had produced. Margaret had insisted we preserve it so the company would remember what it looked like before it learned to pose. The young receptionist did not recognize me. Elaine met me in the lobby and confirmed that counsel had interviewed the witnesses, the auditor had verified the emails, and payment to Northline was frozen. Derek may claim this is personal, she warned. That is why you will chair the meeting and the board will decide his employment, I said. I will answer questions about ownership, nothing more. The boardroom doors were closed. Through the glass wall, I could see Derek at the far end of the long walnut table, standing before a screen that read Horizon, building the next Bennett Morrow. He had always understood presentation. The first slide showed sunlight rising behind a factory that was not ours. Elaine entered first. I followed. Derek stopped speaking. What is he doing here? He asked. The room held 9 directors, our outside counsel, 2 auditors, Miguel Ortiz, and an empty chair reserved for Karen Holloway. Several people knew who I was. The others knew only my name from old corporate records. Elaine placed her folder at the head of the table. Mr. Bennett is attending at my invitation. This is a confidential board session. I am aware. Derek looked directly at me. Whatever he saw made him more confident, not less. I was an old man in the jacket he despised, carrying no briefcase and wearing shoes I had polished myself. Samuel, this is not the place for your family grievance, he said. Wait downstairs. No one moved. I asked you to wait downstairs. I took the empty seat beside Elaine. Derek turned toward the door. Call security. Elaine remained standing. Security will not be necessary. Then have him removed. Sit down, Derek. His face changed. He had heard authority in her voice, but he had not yet understood its source. Elaine opened the leather portfolio before her. For the record, Samuel Bennett is the surviving co-founder of Bennett Morrow Manufacturing. He is also the controlling trustee of the Margaret Bennett Stewardship Trust, which owns 64% of this company. No glass fell. No one gasped. Real shock is usually quieter than movies suggest. Derek simply stared at me. His mouth opened once, then closed. He looked at Elaine, perhaps expecting her to smile and reveal a joke. She did not. That is not possible, he said. It is documented in the governance materials you certified that you had reviewed before accepting your appointment, Elaine replied. The trust is managed by an investment group. The trust retains professional advisors. Mr. Bennett controls its voting authority. Derek gripped the back of his chair. Laura never said anything. Laura did not know the details, I said. That was true. Margaret and I had told her the company was secured in a family trust, but not its percentage or structure. Laura had never asked. She believed the trust existed to preserve the company, not to enrich her, which was exactly what Margaret wanted. Derek's shock began turning into calculation. I could almost see him rearranging every conversation we had ever had. Samuel, he said, softer now. If this is about last night, Laura and I had an argument. Couples argue. I may have spoken too strongly. This meeting is not about your marriage. Then why are you here? Elaine answered. To observe the board's review of your conduct as chief executive officer. She asked Derek to continue his presentation. That unsettled him more than an accusation would have. Continue? You requested approval to execute Horizon immediately. Present your recommendation. For the next 20 minutes, Derek spoke about global competitiveness, underused assets, and $38 million in annual savings. I listened without interruption. Then Elaine asked where his model accounted for customer recertification. It did not. She asked who had verified that the foreign supplier could meet the naval contract's tolerances. Derek named Northline, but could identify no independent specialist. Karen entered with counsel and placed the failed tolerance tests before the board. Derek objected that she was on leave. You suspended her 8 hours after she reported these results, counsel replied. Next came Northline's registration records, office lease, and an email in which Frank Collins discussed our margin with Derek. Miguel placed Derek's signed conflict disclosure beside them. Did you certify that no family member had a financial interest? Elaine asked. The form does not capture the full context. Did you sign it? Yes. Plain questions had finally caught up with him. The auditors then displayed Derek's order to make $12 million disappear from current operations, so his performance calculation would improve. Last came the Arizona flight he had labeled customer development, though the only passengers were Derek, his parents, and 2 friends. The customer canceled, Derek said. Before or after your parents boarded? Elaine asked. He did not reply. For more than an hour, no one mentioned the senior apartment, the brown jacket, the lake cottage, or the way he had spoken to Laura. Those things revealed his character, but they were not why Bennett Morrow might remove a CO. I wanted the distinction to be unmistakable. At last, Elaine asked Derek to wait in the adjoining conference room while the board deliberated. He stood but did not leave. Samuel, may I speak with you privately? No. You let me take this position. I approved your chance to earn it. You concealed who you were. My ownership did not change the truth of any document on this table. He looked around at the directors. This is retaliation. His daughter and I had a personal dispute, and now he is using the company to punish me. I kept my voice level. You mocked me in front of my family. I did nothing. You sent me an apartment brochure and tried to arrange the sale of my home. I did nothing. Those were personal insults, and I can survive them. I placed my hand on the horizon binder. But you concealed your father's interest in a company contract. You pressured employees to distort financial results. You retaliated against a plant director for reporting a safety and certification risk. And you were prepared to gamble with 317 livelihoods so your first year as CO would produce a larger bonus. Derek's face had gone pale. I could forgive the way you treated me, I said. Those 317 families were never yours to sacrifice. Independent counsel opened the adjoining door. This time, Derek walked through it. The board deliberated for 43 minutes. I spoke only once. One director asked whether the trust required Cedar Falls to remain open forever. I said no. A company cannot promise that every job will survive every change, I told them, but it can promise that facts will not be falsified to make a decision convenient. Review the plant honestly. If it must close, I will face those employees myself. If it can be modernized, then we owe them more imagination than a land sale. I did not participate in the employment vote. The directors voted unanimously to terminate Derek for cause, effective immediately. They authorized an independent investigation, canceled the Northline agreement, restored Karen to her position, and froze every Horizon action pending technical and financial review. Miguel was directed to correct the accounting entries and determine what expenses Derek would be required to repay. Elaine asked me to remain while Derek returned. She delivered the decision without drama. Derek listened with his arms at his sides. He asked about severance. Counsel explained that a termination for cause suspended it. He asked whether the company would announce the vendor conflict. Counsel said the board would make all disclosures required by contracts and law. He asked whether I could reverse the vote. The board has acted, I said. You control the board. No. I control enough shares to replace directors who refuse their duty. Today they performed it. For the first time since I had known him, Derek had no speech prepared. At the door, he turned back. What am I supposed to tell Laura? The truth would be new. It was sharper than I intended, but I did not take it back. When I left the building, the afternoon shift was arriving. Men and women crossed the parking lot carrying lunch coolers, safety shoes, and the ordinary worries people bring to work. They did not know how close their jobs had come to becoming a line on somebody's bonus calculation. Most would never know. That was fine. Leadership is not a stage on which every decent act requires applause. I found Laura and Emma in my kitchen. Emma was doing homework. Laura stood at the counter cutting vegetables with one of Margaret's old knives. "How did the meeting go?" she asked. "Derek is no longer employed by Bennett Morrow." The knife stopped. "Because of me?" "No." I told her about Northline, the false disclosures, Karen's suspension, the accounting pressure, and the company plane. I told her the board had voted without my participation. Laura leaned against the counter. "He said the company was his chance to make sure nobody could ever look down on him again. He confused being respected with being untouchable. Did you know all along that this would happen?" "No. I hoped I was wrong until the evidence made hope irresponsible." Emma looked up from her textbook. "You own Dad's company?" "I own most of the company where your father worked." "That is a pretty big thing, not to mention. Your grandmother thought money should be discussed only when it had a job to do. What is its job now?" I considered the question. "To keep the company honest long enough for good people to repair it." Emma nodded as if adding that to her history project. Derek called Laura 17 times that evening. She did not answer. Frank called me to blame Laura and negotiate a quieter exit for his son. I ended the conversation. 3 days later, Derek came to the farmhouse. Laura and Emma were at Rebecca's office, so I met him on the porch. He looked older. Expensive clothes can do little for a man who has lost the audience they were meant to impress. "I need 5 minutes," he said. "You have them." He did not apologize. Not at first. He explained that every modern company used consultants, that the accounting change would have been reversed later, and that Cedar Falls would eventually close under somebody else. He called his mistakes procedural. "Were the loan documents procedural?" I asked. His eyes shifted. "That is between Laura and me." "Then do not ask me to help you with Laura." He lowered his voice. "The termination will destroy my career. Make them change it to a resignation. I will give up the severance. That is not mine to change. Do not pretend you are powerless. I am not powerless. I am refusing to use power to erase a truthful record." He stepped closer. "You set me up. I did not create Northline. I did not write your emails. I did not put your parents on the company plane. You watched. Yes. Why? Because the man who is polite only when the owner is in the room is not qualified to lead anyone." That finally silenced him. He looked past me into the house. "Is Laura here?" "No." "Tell her I am willing to go to counseling. Tell her yourself through the arrangement her attorney provided. You are enjoying this." I thought of Margaret, of Laura crying over an empty mug, of Karen carrying her testing report into the boardroom. "No," I said. "That may be the part you never understand." He left without another word. The independent review lasted 9 weeks. It found no reason Cedar Falls had to close immediately. The plant did need modernization, and pretending otherwise would have been its own kind of dishonesty. Karen led a plan to replace 2 aging production lines, retrain workers, and consolidate work from a leased facility. 26 employees accepted voluntary retirement. 14 positions were eliminated through attrition. The remaining jobs stayed. The solution saved less money in the first year than Horizon had promised. Over 4 years, it produced better margins because customers did not have to recertify foreign production, and defect rates fell. Karen served as interim CO during the review. 6 months later, after a national search, the board offered her the permanent position. She accepted on the condition that no portrait of her be placed in the lobby. "People will assume I am dead," she told me. Margaret would have liked her even more for that. The healthcare bridge for surviving spouses remained in place. Elaine renamed it the Margaret Bennett Family Continuity Program, which embarrassed me and would have delighted Margaret. We funded it permanently through a small percentage of annual profits so that no future CEO could remove it simply to improve 1 quarter. Derek repaid the personal travel expenses in a civil settlement. The investigation continued without my interference. Laura returned to full-time nursing. She opened her own bank account and learned, with great irritation, how many household bills Derek had kept from her. She filed for legal separation first and for divorce 4 months later. I never celebrated that decision. A marriage ending is still a loss, even when ending it is necessary. Derek attended counseling twice, then stopped. He sent apologies that often began well and ended by explaining what everyone else had done to him. Laura stopped answering those. Their communication became limited to Emma and handled through a parenting application. Emma had the hardest road. She understood that her father had done wrong and still loved him. We never demanded that she choose one truth. I told her only that Derek had made serious choices and had refused, for too long, to accept responsibility. The following spring, Emma completed her local history project. She called it The Hands Behind the Name. Instead of writing about executives, she interviewed machinists, inspectors, maintenance workers, and retired employees from Cedar Falls. Karen arranged a Saturday tour so Emma could photograph the old production line before it was replaced. Laura and I went with her. Near the entrance stood a bronze plaque I had not looked at in years. It showed Margaret in safety glasses, smiling beside the words, Margaret Bennett. She remembered that every payroll number had a family. Emma read it twice. Grandma was an owner too? She asked. From the first night she did payroll at our kitchen table. But was her name on the papers? Eventually. It should have been there sooner. Laura slipped her arm through mine. We walked through the plant as the new line completed its first test run. The machine was quieter than the old one and fast enough to make me suspicious. Karen handed me a finished housing, still warm from inspection. I turned it over in my hands and found the maker's mark stamped near the base. Cedar Falls. For years, I had believed my responsibility was to protect what Margaret and Elias and I had built. Standing there, I understood that protection did not mean freezing the company in time. It meant making sure change served the work instead of one man's appetite. Emma asked whether she might own the company someday. Maybe part of it, I said, but ownership is not a crown. What is it? A promise with paperwork? She laughed. That sounds like something an old engineer would say. I am an old engineer. Later that afternoon, Laura and I stopped at Margaret's grave. Laura told her mother about the new production line, Emma's project, and the divorce hearing scheduled for June. I stood a few steps away, pretending to examine a maple tree so my daughter could have privacy. Before we left, Laura touched the top of the stone. I thought Dad kept saving me, she said softly, but he just kept reminding me I could choose. I had to look away then. Derek believed power was the ability to enter a room and make everyone else feel smaller. For a while, I may have believed the opposite mistake. That good people proved themselves by hiding their power completely. Margaret understood it better than either of us. Real power is not the chair at the head of the table, the title on the door, or the number of people who become silent when you speak. It is the ability to act, joined to the discipline to wait for the truth. It is knowing the difference between an insult to your pride and harm done to people who trusted you. It is refusing to destroy a man simply because you can, while still stopping the damage he chose to cause. My son-in-law had no idea I owned the company that made him CO. In the end, that was never the lesson. The lesson was what he did when he believed no owner was watching.